the worst I hate to break it to you moment you had with someone? My dad showed up at my apartment with flowers for me like I was his girlfriend, and my fiancé had to tell him he was my father, not my husband. I always knew my dad was weird about me. When my parents divorced when I was 9, my mom moved on pretty quick, found herself a nice guy named Paul who treated me like a normal stepdaughter. But my dad? He never dated anyone, ever. He'd always say I was his whole world and he didn't need anyone else. At first it felt special. He'd pick me up from school with my favorite candy. He'd take me shopping and let me get whatever I wanted. He called our Saturday hangouts daddy-daughter dates, which seemed normal enough when I was 10. But things got weird as I got older. When I started wearing makeup in 8th grade, he threw it all away and said I was too beautiful to need that garbage. When I got my first phone, he demanded all my passwords because he needed to protect me from predators. He'd scroll through my texts every night at dinner. High school was worse. He hated all my friends, especially the guys. If I hung out with anyone he didn't approve of, he'd give me the silent treatment for days. Just sit at dinner staring at his plate, acting like I didn't exist until I apologized. The worst was when I told him I was dating Trevor when I was 17. We were driving to Target and I casually mentioned I had a boyfriend. He pulled into the parking lot and just started crying, like ugly sobbing. He said I was throwing away everything we had together for some stupid boy who didn't really know me. I felt so guilty I broke up with Trevor the next week. College gave me some space, but he'd call me 3 times a day. If I didn't answer, he'd drive the 2 hours to campus to make sure I was okay. My roommate thought it was sweet at first until she saw him show up at 1 a.m. because I'd fallen asleep without texting him goodnight. After graduation, I moved to my own apartment and met Malik at my job. He was calm, funny, and didn't think it was weird when I said I needed to call my dad every single day. Malik would just smile and go make us coffee while I dealt with my dad's daily interrogation about what I ate, who I talked to, and what time I'd be home. When I told my dad I was engaged, he lost his mind. He sent me like 15 texts in a row about how I was using him, how he gave me everything, and how I was replacing him with some stranger I barely knew. He said he thought what we had was special, and that he'd do anything to win me back. That should have been my first red flag. Who talks about winning back their daughter? But the final straw came last month. I was making dinner with Malik when someone knocked on our door. Malik went to answer it and there was my dad holding a bouquet of red roses. Not the cheap grocery store kind either, like fancy long-stemmed ones you'd give to a girlfriend. He pushed past Malik and walked into our kitchen like he owned the place. He set the flowers on the counter and started this whole speech about how he'd been thinking about our relationship and wanted to start fresh. He said he knew he'd been controlling, but that he just loved me so much and couldn't bear the thought of losing me to another man. Malik just stood there in the doorway watching this unfold. My dad kept talking about how we could go to couples therapy together to work through our issues. Couples therapy, like we were dating. Finally, Malik cleared his throat and said in the calmest voice possible, "Sir, I hate to break it to you, but you're her father, not her husband." The silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. My dad's face went completely white and then bright red. He looked between me and Malik like he couldn't process what was happening. I just stood there frozen. I couldn't even defend my dad because Malik was right. Everything my dad had said sounded exactly like what you'd hear from a jealous ex-boyfriend, not a father. My dad grabbed his flowers and stormed out without saying another word. He's texted me a few times since then, but they're just nonsense about how Malik is poisoning my mind against family. I've been going to therapy, and my therapist says what I experienced was emotional incest.